Three, two, one. Shalom, everybody, and welcome to another conversation, the Israel Bible Scholar interview. It's so exciting to have with us today Rabbi Barnea Levi, who is a rabbi and an archaeologist. Not too many rabbi archaeologists.
And funny.
Okay. Rabbi Selavan is originally from Chicago, Illinois, and has a rabbinic ordination from Ner Israel in Baltimore. Yeah?
Yes, Rabbi Ruderman.
I also studied in Ner Israel in Baltimore, and then came to Israel, where it seems like he was a. Actually, tell us, Rabbi Selavan, about your journey from Chicago to Israel into archaeology.
So first of all, I have to object to the word "from." I was born in Chicago, and technically that says I'm a native of. But Moses, the daughters of Jethro ran in and said, an Egyptian man saved us. And he didn't object. He didn't say, I'm a Hebrew, I'm not an Egyptian. And therefore he did not merit burial in Israel. So I'm from Israel. I was born in Cook County in Chicago, lying and waiting in hospital on the campus of the university, right next to the Oriental Institute Museum. And my rabbi says, now I understand. The impact from an early age. I went to Hill Academy of Pittsburgh and then to Ner Israel. And the grandson of Rav Ruderman Zatzal was Rav Matis Weinberg. He made a yeshiva in Santa Clara, California that ended up visiting and then establishing a branch in Israel. And I was from the 15 boys who, after exploring Israel for 2 summers with a Bible and a Mishnah and a Talmud in hand and seeing how things connected, came to the old city where I'm sitting now and ended up giving tours just because people were lost on the street. You ended up giving them a tour because you wanted them to appreciate the special place we lived in. And that became my profession. I'm a licensed tour guide. At a certain point, my learning partner, David Wilner, and I said, there's so much talent in Israel. We have to do something with that. We made something called Foundation Stone. And then we had an experience. I was asked to give a tour around the country to a group from Atlanta where I met my wife and was married in Atlanta, of Jews who go to Reform temples, conservative synagogues, Orthodox synagogues. Were coming on a joint trip. I said, I don't know the country, give them to me in the old city for 2 days. But they insisted that I be the guide. So we went around, and at that point, Sipori, which is a city in the Galilee, had just had an investment in its archaeology, in its infrastructure, and had the greatest high tech of its time in its museum because of the tremendous Russian aliyah of the early 90s. So many people were employed in archaeology. It moved Sipori forward, it moved Beit Shan forward, really wise. A few things jumped forward. So we're standing there in Sipori, and there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah is the oral law, 12-volume set, 13-volume set. One of them is open. It's explaining the Mishnah. And it says, here Rabbi Judah the Prince wrote the Mishnah. And Liz Lee from Alpharetta, Georgia says, Rabbi, what is this book? What is its relevance for our time? And why haven't I heard about it in my temple? And I was so stunned by the question that I almost broke the case leaning on it, but I started to explain that in Jewish tradition, there's a written Torah and there's an oral Torah that goes with it. And I'm looking through the group and I see a sign facing me, the 10 exiles of the Sanhedrin of the Great Court. I said, I'm in Sipori. I learned about Sipori in 11th grade. And this time throughout my life, I'm in that, it hadn't clicked. It was my first time there. But her question, Leslie's question, was fascinating. The openness of, I want to learn, the impact of what Rabbi Shalom Streicher later coined, the power of the place. I'm in the place. All of a sudden, I get it on a different level. The verse comes alive, the historical event comes alive. Americans have this if they visit Gettysburg. You know, or very sweet, George Washington was here, right? You know you're in the presence of that event that was formative. I think as a child, I don't remember which church it is. Oh, now I could Google it. I don't remember which church it is, but the guide said, and this is where Patrick Henry said, you know, give me liberty or give me death. It was so moving, right? So I now have that experience and share that experience on a regular basis because David Walden and I went out and we sat a program in the Patmos Sanhedrin. We discovered that nobody had worked in ancient Yavne, and we made an excavation at Yavne a number of different times, and we have an open invitation to further develop Yavne, which is the birthplace of modern Judaism. And actually, according to our lead archaeologist at the time, Avner Goren, that set the pace for Islam and for Christianity to say, I don't need a specific place. I'm not bound in, I can serve God anywhere. Yavne helped foster that also, help foster the service of God. But you and I are sitting here because of what happened in Yavne, despite the fact that our national, political, religious center was destroyed and the bulk of our people were exiled from our land, and that was several thousand years ago. Tough. We're back. We're still thinking. I see books on your shelf behind you, Svarman behind you, and that is thanks to what happened in Yavne. So one thing led to another, and we give lectures all over the world. We have been involved in a few excavations, and now we've each become archaeologists because we found out that when you're in tour guide, even if you're in tour guide school and you've learned the whole country and you've been tested on it and you know the routes and you know the programming, so-and-so gave you your tour of Masada. But she or he didn't tell you that their approach is X, but really it's an academic discussion. There's 7 different approaches. And all you need is one. Don't confuse the tourists. Yeah. And this one said, Josephus is totally unreliable. And you didn't, but if you were in a different tour guide school, then you're going to say, Josephus has Masada down to within a meter. He was incredibly accurate. Yeah. You don't realize that things are a discussion. You were given one version, so to speak. So what happened to us? We fell into publicizing an excavation. And the lead excavator said, I'm proving King David. And we didn't see that, but who are we to tell? A senior archaeologist who's ready to put his reputation on the line. So we helped him publicize the way he saw it beyond what we saw. And then we found out, no, it's not generally accepted within the normative academic world. And one thing led to another, and I went to Tel Aviv University, and my partner's gone to Haifa University, and I have field experience. And when an announcement comes in, like today, geomagnetic discovery, dating, it's connected to the dating of the First Temple period, I'm getting notes all over. What does that mean? I can help with that because I have the basic education. And it just so happens that my classmate is doing her doctorate on that very 5 feet by 5 feet. So I have a little of the headway, and my teacher is one of the 2 main archaeologists. 2 of my teachers are from the main archaeologists quoted. But at any rate, that you can parse it because the media almost always totally gets things wrong. So, and we want to teach Torah. We want to teach the real thing. So I have a book on my shelf, and I'll finish this introduction now so you can get a word in edgewise. I have a book on my shelf from Professor Zohar Amar of Bar-Ilan University. He is the inheritor of Professor Yehuda Felix of blessed memory. He is the main man when it comes to the botany of the Bible and of the Talmud. So this book is called Simchei Mikra, the plants of the Bible. First chapter. Here's how we define things. Here's how we identify. Here's how it works. Second chapter. We know these for sure. Third chapter. These are very probable. Fourth chapter, these are possible. Fifth chapter, these we don't know. Because there's this constant danger which is expressed by the Bible. I'm sorry, I don't have a trowel handy. I'm sorry. The Bible in one hand and the trowel in the other, and you could miss things. You're coloring this is Tel Aviv approach, but I learned it in Ner Israel, right? This is how you analyze a pasuk, a verse. This is how you analyze the pottery. This is what's happening in the lab. Here's ancient text. Here's an Assyrian text. This is how you understand it. You do each discipline separately, and then you see if they're combined. Because if you don't, you're making assumptions that could be totally wrong, skewer history, and affect 100 years of scholarship following, especially if you're a big name and everybody will just quote you. And I'm not going to name the name, but I have 2 books on my shelf. That's what he did to the field.
Okay, so you said a lot of things, a lot of fascinating things, but what I wanted to hear more about was the power of the place, okay? Try to convey that. What's the power of the place when it comes to, being able to read the Bible here in the land of Israel?
A slight adjustment. When you're talking about the land of Israel, you must ignore the boundaries of 1922 and 1948 and ceasefire lines of 1967. So I want to give you an example that personally shook me. So there's a person who had a prophecy, right? They were talking in the 90s, and he said, there's going to be peace with Jordan. It's going to happen. And he sat there and studied the geography and the archaeology of Jordan. They announced the peace. The first day the border was open, Dudu Cohen from Efrat, David Ben Gad Cohen from Efrat, went over the border. Sometime later, I was at a meeting of tour guides. Everybody said where they're from. He said, I'm from Amman and Efrat. Right. He was in Jordan all the time. He lived it. And he made a special study about roads. There is what's called the King's Highway. In the Bible, the people of Israel tell Edom, and they tell again to Sichon, we won't go left, we won't go right, we'll stay straight on the main road, we'll buy our food and our water from you, just let us go through. That road, the Romans later made into the Via Traianus, the Trajan Road. It's very obvious. You're going through the mountains to your, if you're going from south to north, as the children of Israel did, to the left, to the west are mountains and ravines, impassable by a group. To the right is a desert. There's a lot. You just go here. Nothing has changed in thousands of years. Just follow this line. You'll be okay. Dudu Cohen said from his understanding of the sources and the topography, at a certain section, there must be a road further east. This is not the road that the children of Israel took on their way coming up once they were given permission to go through the desert of Sin and to cross Elot and to come on going around Moab. Right. And we took a driver, an Arab driver with a little backtrack and another guy who knew the land well. And we go further east into the middle of nowhere and we find the tracks, the signs clearly of Romans filling in little valleys and ditches, making an 8-meter wide road. We found a road, I'm accompanying him, where he felt it should be. We found clear evidence of a Roman road that nobody had noticed. And he told me, you are now standing on the path of the children of Israel.
Wow. Wow.
Now, I had experienced being where King David was and Abraham. Just, I can be on that path. It was chilling to think of the millions of people walking by here. And since the Romans were the identification, because the Romans identified, this is a good path. They cheated, right? They fixed here, they lowered there. It's but this is the way to go, right? You can't, there's no way I can express that to stand on the edge of the Arnon Canyon. And though this is the Arnon and they cross the Arnon and the song of the well of Miriam after that crossing, my son's name is Nachliel, which appears, we didn't name it there, but it appears in that song. There are some times, otherwise, when the geography of the Bible is so clear, together with the archaeological identification of a site or an area where it's not guesswork. There's a lot of things which are suppositions, where it's reasonable, where it's probably. There's a couple points, there's a few nodes, like where we found the name on it. Yeah, like where it's been inhabited for thousands of years and never stopped. There's no question that Haran is Haran. It never stopped being on the Quran. It's on ancient maps of the Quran. You couldn't just make it up. People say, what? What do you think? But it's never changed. So you're in Haran, right? Of the Haran of where Rebecca and Rachel and Leah come from, and Sarah come from. There's no question it's Haran. It's a huge mound. It would take you more than an hour to walk around it. The buildings on top are not from that time, but I went to a well from the Bronze Age, from the Middle Bronze Age. It's a 4,000-year-old well. It's not on the side of town if you were coming like Jacob, coming up from Canaan. It's on the other side of town. So I couldn't say this is the well where he popped off the top for Rachel, but it's a well operating Haran from that time. And I was with a group of people from Muncie, New York. And they're different ages, but they all had the same, I think her name was Mora Rivka, the same teacher in kindergarten, who had made up a whole line of songs for Genesis. And they all started singing to themselves, Rivka at the well, right? That was, right?
Where in Israel, though, proper, in modern Israel today, is power of the place?
Two different things. If you want me to answer for modern Israel proper, I will, but, right? Israel proper and modern Israel, not the same thing, right? When you're in Hebron, you can stand, you're not technically allowed to walk there, but you can stand on the staircase and you can see walls from the time of Abraham. Clear as day, clear as day. You're looking at walls from the time of the patriarchs. That's very moving. Shiloh, also very clear that you're in Shiloh. That's in Judges and on, but that's very clear. The rivers, when you're at the Euphrates or at the Tigris, right? You see, who can ignore modern Israel? Then you can make the blessing of Osamai Aspirations, who is made at the Nile, but I haven't been to the Nile. One of the primal rivers mentioned in Genesis 2:11, etc. When you're on the path of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, which is basically Beersheba, Hebron, past Bethlehem, Jerusalem, between Beit El and Ai, Shechem, and going up Damascus, then you're on, give or take, between this valley and that valley, you're there. I think Hebron, if I had to take somebody from Lod Airport and put them immediately into the story of the patriarchal period, I would take them to Hebron.
So it's interesting because in this week's Torah portion that we just read yesterday, so God tells to Moses that every spot or to the children of Israel, every spot on which your foot treads, this is in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 24, shall be yours. Your territory shall extend from the wilderness to the Lebanon and from the river, the Euphrates, to the western sea. That should be your border.
Right. I hope that's helpful to you to get the words modern Israel out of your head. I hope we've cured that. Yes.
Well, it's, I guess, okay, so maybe can you then, okay, this would be a really fascinating thing. Could you explain the different borders? Because we have some very expansive borders, but at the same time, there's almost like an intrinsic contradiction because we know that Moses was not allowed to enter into the land of Israel, yet he is in Moab at the time and on the other side of the Jordan. And is that part of Israel or is that not part of Israel?
So first of all, I apologize for sparring, and you've raised a very important point. Rabbi Yisrael Ariel has an atlas of the land of Israel. It's about 7 volumes. The later volumes are killing strength. It means if you throw that book at somebody, you could kill them. His book on Transjordan is a dangerous book. It's so thick and heavy. But just the introduction, there's 17 different systems. And on the basic one, it's like here, from the Nile. Most people will say it's the Nile. It might be one river over is the Nahar Mitzrayim. That's a question of what we're referring to. But either way, you're close to Egypt. You're further over. I have a book with maps to my left. If we get more into it, I'll pull it out. And the Euphrates, the question is where on the Euphrates? But just like he said here to Moshe, and just like he says to Abraham, and just like the opening chapter of Joshua, you have to earn that. It's wherever the ball of your foot treads. You don't go there, you don't have it. And we did not master the area from the Nile to Euphrates when we had the opportunity with Joshua and the 12 tribes. And there's a review of that, both in the book of Joshua and in the book of Judges, highlighting they didn't get this, and they didn't get this, and they didn't get this, and they didn't get this. They didn't finish the job when they could have. When King David goes further north and captures some areas and actually puts his hand into the Euphrates, he had not finished taking hold of all of the lands in what you call Israel proper, and therefore it's called a private conquest, and imbued some levels of sanctity. And that's why the Jews of Aleppo and the Jews of Damascus kept some laws of Trumot and Masrot, of the laws of the fruits and vegetables of the land of Israel, but only a few of them. And then the next level up is Transjordan, which had the sanctity of the land of Israel. Once we entered the mainland, it did too. But once we went into exile, and the tribes of Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh went into exile, that part of the land, in the mainstream opinion, lost its sanctity. And in the time of the Second Temple, the rabbis deliberately did not reinvest it with full sanctity, just partially. Very fascinating, and this is relevant to us here today, so that the poor people would have a food supply, a reliable food supply in the 7th sabbatical year. So in the 7th sabbatical year, one gives, if Jewish owned land there, one gives the presents to the priest, to the Levite, and various responsibilities from rabbinical law. And in the 7th sabbatical year, not only in the 3rd and 6th year, but also in the 7th sabbatical year, after first tithe, the second tithe goes to the poor. Now, what are those boundaries? Yeah, and even within the modern state of Jordan, you can go south enough or east enough where you're not in those boundaries either. And the people of Bnei Brak, last Shemitah, and I assume they're going to do it this coming Shemitah as well, had whole fields grown there because they don't rely on what the Jerusalem rabbinate relies on, and they need imported food from outside of Israel. They use southern modern Jordan for that. So there's different levels of the sanctity of the land of Israel, and we never completed the process mentioned in that verse that you did.
It's interesting because so originally when God gives the blessing to Abraham, he sort of makes a blessing and says that you're going to have a small piece of land, but if you deserve it, you'll have a bigger piece of land. And if you're really on your best behavior, you'll have a very expansive area and territory. Is that what you're suggesting?
It's slightly different. Here's the whole playing field. As much as you cover is yours. I think it's before you were born, but when I was a little boy, especially when I played hooky and didn't go to school, from the most exciting things a housewife would watch, or I, the 5-year-old at home, watch, was a supermarket spree, where the winner of this contest got 4 minutes or 7 minutes to go through the supermarket and throw whatever they could into the shopping cart, and that was theirs. And there were some specials and this. That's what it is, as much as you get done. And we blame Joshua, Rabbi Weiss. We blame Joshua for not being more proactive in leading the conquest of the land. And that's why he lives to 110 instead of 120. He was not proactive enough in this.
But then why was he disappointed? And why is he fighting with God to let him into the land if in fact he was in the land?
It's a wonderful question. I don't want to take the responsibility of the full answer, but the way in which it's expressed is this. I've started the conquest. I've caught the lands here of Sichon and Og. Now, you know this, who got those lands in the end? God and Reuven, and someone added in, it's from God and from Moshe, but he hadn't asked for it, half the tribe of Manasseh. Very interesting how the half tribe gets in there. And several times it happens that Moshe says, and you should, so don't just leave that and come in with the rest of us. We don't need this land. Come in with the rest of us. No, we're going to keep this deal. We'll stay here. And we really want to have this anyway. So it got co-opted in. So what would have been if Reuben and Gad had not asked? What would have been the status of that land that Manasseh, the children of Manasseh, went up in the north? Maybe that would have stayed. Maybe it just meant friendly territory there. But it could be that the whole area of Transjordan, nobody would have lived there. God responded positively to Reuven and God's request. But you see, even the last minute, Moshe, you could just leave it, just coming over here. And in fact, they are somewhat blamed for choosing that. That's why they went into exile first. Very interesting how the rabbis understand it. So because of what they did, it was imbued with the sanctity of the land in the time of the judges and the first temple. It was lost. It could have stayed totally lost. The rabbis decided to reinvest it partially to be beneficial, to have a food source. We know of Jewish communities there in the Second Temple who were there also. It's part of this the world also. The Mesha, king of Moab, Stela, which is sitting in the Louvre, and has his version of the battle described in Kings 2, chapter 3, talks about the people of God were here, and the king of Israel was here, and I beat them off. So it's very important to totally ignore the current modern boundaries when you're in a Bible frame of mind and you're thinking the boundaries. That's every much part of Israel to a degree, but it's certainly part of the history. The Maccabees go and save Jewish communities on that side of the Jordan. There's Maccabees, right? It's every much part of it. And I want to tell you a wild approach. I think that the Babylonians took the exiles of Jerusalem down south, past Bethlehem, past the current tomb of Rachel, who's praying for them on the road, down past Hebron and over the south of the Dead Sea, and then up the King's Road to Babylon, rather than try and take them through Samaria. I could be wrong, but that's my approach. But I deal with the region as one. When you're in the Bible, you deal with it all as one.
Really fascinating. Now, when I don't know if it was Yasser Arafat or some of the Palestinians would claim that the Israeli flag demonstrates our national aspiration, where the two lines at the bottom of the flag and the top of the flag are the Nile and the Euphrates. The star in the middle shows that we won't rest until we capture their territory as well. Have you ever heard that?
No.
So
I saw Arafat hold up, I saw the picture of him holding up a picture where the temple stands instead of the Dome of the Rock. Abu Mazen in the UN said it's all Palestine, it's all our land, it's all our homeland, to the exclusion of us. The foreign minister of Lebanon, who resigned the day before the explosion, just before, called us a terrorist state, thieves, etc. But that one I have not heard.
Okay, so the criticism is, but I guess it's a criticism against Israel. However, what are in fact our national aspirations? And at the time that we're living today, with the ingathering of the exiles and all of these Bible miracles and the prophecies coming to life, so do we in fact have plans? If not plans, do we hope that God will expand our borders further than where they are today? Is that part of our mission to fulfill our destiny from the Nile to the Euphrates?
That's a very delicate question. I think like this, that that there is a deep controversy of the legitimacy of the state of Israel from a Torah point of view. There are circles that say we took an oath that we would not start up, that we would accept exile, and here we're rejecting. There's a number of responses to that. It's a fascinating discussion. I don't have an opinion on it. It's not my business, so to speak, on that level. But I grew up in a Ner Israel background. And that background, the Eastern European yeshiva background, says like this. Your prime responsibility right now is to be ethical, moral, care, and do. When you expand that into the modern, so that's reaching out, that's caring for the poor always, for the widows always, for social justice always. But if you were born now in this generation, there is an Israel. How do you respond to that? You have the opportunity now to do commandments that you didn't do before. It needs to be defended. It's here, it's there. How do you respond to that? If you're ignoring the fact that there is a slave trade, that there are Jews whose lives are a threat in Iran and Syria, that there is an incredible assimilation rate, and that we have a new challenge over the past several years, that our image of Israel and the people of Israel is damaged, corrupted, bad, so that a normative Jewish student in second year university on a college campus might find an anti-apartheid line and not been able to go to lunch and is embarrassed, might be joining BDS because they have a Jewish sense of morals and they've learned that Israel is immoral, right? And we have those challenges. How dare you talk about, well, really this little piece of land should be ours and that's our aspirations. In that sense, Rabbi Shlomo Aviner is the rabbi of Beit El, prolific writer, and the head of the yeshiva Ateret Kohanim, Ateret Yerushalayim, which is a 3-minute walk from the Temple Mount, and has led, and I watched him on the phone once take personal responsibility for a loan, the gradual process of reclaiming old Jewish property in the old city and buying other properties, so that whereas once the Jews were a majority population within the walls of Jerusalem, but making it normal that Jews live throughout the old city again. It says the Temple Mount, that's God's neighborhood, that's not for us. In Makor Rishon, in the newspaper of Friday, they were bringing that Rabbi Cook Sr. had a change between 1917-18 and 1920-21 as a result of seeing the riots, as a result of becoming chief rabbi. That's the historian's analysis in the paper. I brought it home, right, in the paper. And he said that, and he didn't differentiate between the side of the temple, the whole Temple Mount. Temple Mount, not our business. Let's focus on what we can. Let's keep the commandments of the land. Let's make sure people are honest. Yeah, let's make sure they say, oh, it was my pleasure doing business with Israel. Everybody kept their agreements. The goods came on time. They were the highest quality. It was the best technology. That's our focus, the ethical, moral Israel. If we have to fight, we have to fight. If somebody's polluting, we'll stop the polluting. If there's a social justice system which is biased this side against this side, we'll go out, we'll protest, or we'll join and we'll become part of the government. You have, our fellow Ner Israel, Musmach of Ner Israel is Rabbi Dov Lipman. He went out. He started with caring for what was happening in Beit Shemesh. He got put into the national scene. He's doing all kinds of things to help people to get things done within the system. Right? I'm fully part of this society. Other people will take part. I'll be out of the society, but I'm going to teach and make sure there's a core, that will feed into this, whatever it is. But how are you responding and caring? It used to be our fight in America was, what's kosher? So I remember a cross-country trip in '79. The only thing we found kosher was in the gas station. There were Walt Disney lollipops with an OU. There was nothing else we could eat. Now you can walk, and this is the OU accomplished this together with other organizations, but that was the goal. You can walk into any supermarket in North America and find kosher food. Good, you won that battle. Now what? Who's proud of being Jewish? Who's keeping Shabbat? Who's caring about marrying Jews? That's the focus, and not when are we going to fight a war so that everything in the tribe of Asher becomes ours. I've taught in Turkey. And they're very sensitive there because they know the Bible, they know to the Euphrates, and they're always wondering, are they teaching the Jews that really Turkey, remember the sensitivity of the nationalism at the Turk before Erdogan, are they saying this is really Israel? My great-grandfather bought land, it was called Menucha V'Nachla, I don't know where it is, but Ataturk confiscated it, right? But he was trying to build up the land of Israel. He participated, he bought shares, yeah? This is a delicate subject. I would say that it's definitely not our focus. In the back of our mind, we know this biblical promise. We have to deal with, is there corruption? Are the streets safe? Are our children safe? This emerges.
Aren't we then as guilty as Joshua, who failed to conquer the entire land?
If anytime you're sitting on your couch in the land of Israel and enjoying a piece of fruit that somebody grew, you are keeping the midst of the land of Israel. But in terms of your judgment before God, if you're not using every bit of your talent and your energies to help Israel grow, then you're guilty. Not everybody is the soldier. There is a man who is now beginning the 9th year into an 11th year plan of growing the best black truffles on the planet. Yes, yeah, in Israel, in the Golan. He's out there. That is part of holding the land. That's part of why we protected against the rockets of Syria last week. That's right. That's his battle. He has made that battle. If he does that, this one will earn money. This one will earn money. The name of Israel will go up because of black. I'm not talking about the white truffles of the Negev. That's somebody else. So if everybody, as the symphony, is using their creative energies, like you are in terms of speaking, communicating, all that is part of the process, and it emerges out of that. And we don't dictate the events like this corona epidemic, which is why I have a light ring facing me so that I can handle an interview. And you see who is doing this? Poor time. Who was thinking like this?
Okay, so you're saying that we should do our best to develop Israel morally, spiritually, and God will take care of the boundaries.
And the rest will emerge. The rest will emerge. And in terms of the order of priorities, wearing my rabbinical hat, I'm taking the responsibility of answering and say that those are the more urgent and those are the priorities if you had a choice what to work on, this or that. Now, there are those who are involved in redeeming the land, in buying new property and adding to that. That's its own field. But any of these other things involve either war or almost unprecedented, which is potentially could happen, is a whole group, and did happen in Rajar in the north, saying, Israel, please take us over. We want to be with you, right? We don't want to be with them. That could happen. And there, I'm sure that if they would not be worried about being killed, literally, I don't know if you're aware of this. Macron visited Lebanon yesterday, right? The Lebanese on the street saying, please save us from Hezbollah.
Yeah, that is a wonderful messianic vision, and I love it. That one day the Arab neighbors will invite Israel to take from the Nile to the Euphrates.
That's broad, but I'm telling you that on the individual level, if they were free, there are many that would say right now. I was in Shfar'am, which is an Arab town, and the Arab guardian of the synagogue said, come here, make a yeshiva. The Sanhedrin was here. The Arab is telling you, right? There's no question.
There's Rabbi Selavan. This was a pleasure speaking with you. And how do people stay in touch with you or read your articles or watch your videos?
Well, we have foundationstone.org website, and we do podcasts and keep people informed about interesting archaeological finds. On Facebook, it's called LandMinds, M-I-N-D-S, LandMinds. And we're here to foster true learning and to be carefully distill what's real, what's not, what can we share. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.